fake news. Will Davis is cracking me up today.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, wait. We've got a question here. Does sake have a lower sugar and lower acidity than wine? And Monica, you want to take that one?
Yeah, absolutely. So sake has very low acid compared to wine, especially tartaric acid, which is great that it lacks tartaric acid because that's what gives you heartburn. That's what erodes your teeth enamel. When I'm not drinking sake, I drink a lot of champagne, and my dentist is always relieved that I drink sake to counterbalance that. Otherwise, my teeth would be falling out at this point. In terms of sugar, the fact that sake is so low in acid means sugar acidity balances out sugar. You could have a wine with a lot of residual sugar, but if it had enough acidity, you would call that a dry wine. And so, not having those tart acids, the sake is going to taste a lot sweeter than it is. It's a beverage made from rice. Rice has an inherent sweetness, but it is the sakes that we're having tonight are dry fermented. The fermentable sugars are converted into alcohol. So it's going to be a lot lower in sugar than most people think. Glucose is also metabolized differently than how people metabolize fructose. And so I do find that it doesn't, people who are sensitive to sugar tend to do better with sake than they do with sugar and other alcohols. And I mean, Japanese people are generally pretty fit. So if that's any indication.
I like that. Just a little. We're just gonna leave that one right there. You know what? And I skipped ahead of us a little bit because we did pour the hakutsuru, and I know we're not quite all drinking. You know, it's COVID times, guys. Not everything is perfect. We didn't get the same sakes at the same time. Not a big deal. But I would love to just speak a little bit about this particular one that we opened up. What is it? You know, when you open up a wine or a whiskey, you're looking for certain notes. What is it that you do with sake when you open it up for the first time and have your first sip?
Well, you want to taste it like a wine. I mean, you do want to stick your nose in the glass, give it give it a little bit of room to move around. I mean, the small glasses are very ceremonial, and they're just a really important part of sake drinking culture in Japan. It's such a honorific act to pour sake for someone else. But you do want to have enough room to swirl it around. And sake, not quite as dramatically as wine, but sake is going to change as air gets into it. Generally, when I stick my nose in the glass, I decide if it's an aromatic sake or not. And then if it is an aromatic sake, if it's more fruity or floral or more savory and earthy.
Mm.
This is a pretty restrained sake. I mean, this is like Marcus said, it's really versatile. It's not going to get in the way of anything that you throw its way. It's sturdy. It can be heated up. It can be drink chilled. I'm also having this at room temperature, but generally with sake, I always say this to people because I think most people would feel silly taking a glass of wine and saying it smells like grapes. That would be a really amateur thing to say. But with sake, you are going to get a rice note from most sakes. And with this sake, being a junmai is pure rice sake, and so I tend to get more of a rice note from junmai sakes than others. And so there is a really nice soft steamed rice aroma and a pillowy ricey mid palate on this sake.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then you look for secondary aromas. Are there floral notes? Is there citrus? This is definitely not an exuberant sake, so I would probably rule out more of the tropical fruit notes and like the really bubblegum, lychee, licorice notes. But this has more like a little bit of a wood note, like sandalwood, um, that ricey note, a little bit of dairy, more of a milk or cream quality.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
people
then
will say like this sake is a creamier. I'm looking for a creamier sake or
yeah,
clear or cloudy. You know what? I will ask the dumb questions here and not be ashamed. So like I remember pre going to Japan, going and saying, well, I want a cloudy sake or a creamy sake, but that means nothing, right?
well, so sake is made from during fermentation, you're dissolving rice. And so at the end of fermentation, you have a tank of what looks like rice porridge. So when you have a cloudy sake, some of that dissolved rice is integrated back into the sake. So
Mm-hmm.
it's totally natural. And that definitely is a style. I always tell people to talk about sake in a food pairing way. Like if you go into a sake bar and you say I want a sake that goes with steak, they're going to give you something very different than if you walk in and say I want a sake that goes with oysters.
Okay.
There's a sake bar in Tokyo that I like where the whole menu, one side of it is sake that goes with prosciutto, and the other side is sake that goes with oysters. And you kind of understand what they're talking
Ugh,
about.
I hate not being able to travel. Why did you say that? Now I just this is now I'm depressed. That's amazing, and it makes me wonder, Julia, like how pre the new reality, like how many people were coming into the bar and having that experience with sake where you we would liken it to going to a wine bar or a craft brewery.
When we first opened Kumiko, we offered a omakase style tasting menu at the bar. We have 8 seats here. And at the start of everyone's experience, we'd speak to them about their beverage preferences, as we were going to do customized pairing for every person for the food. So they could get any combination of beer, wine, Japanese sake, cocktails, spirit free, low proof, high proof, speaking to if they enjoy acidic cocktails or stirred and supple and smooth cocktails. And then based off of that, we would often end up with 8 different pairings on the bar. And more often than not, folks wanted to dive into Japanese sake. It is a very kind of mysterious category for a lot of people. And so when they are experiencing a tasting menu where everything is in the chef's hands, I think they really enjoy putting the beverage side into the bartender's hands.
Mm-hmm.
And what I always found to be really exciting was to be able to speak to people about Japanese sake in terms of wine or in terms of cocktails or just in terms of flavors and ingredients that are in the dishes themselves and creating these mirrors in pairing form, but also looking for contrasting elements as well.
Yeah.
So it's an incredible, incredible drink to have for pairings.
Well, and I feel like we're getting pulled into kind of the meat. That's my pun. The meat of this live happy hour, which is food pairings, and we've got a lot to dig into there. So just before we go into that section, pardon? We're not there. My producer, come on. Before we go into that, Marcus, we talked the other day, and I would just love to do this primer for folks as we continue to get into this Junmai, Daigenjo.
Right.
Where do we begin? How do we navigate?
Okay. So one thing is people generally say I always ask people, do you want, like Julia was just mentioned, their taste preferences. A lot of people say they want dry sake, but I think that also relates back to what Monica said. In general, people think that sake tastes sweeter than it really is. So if they've had a little bit of sake, oh, this is sweet, but it's really not. So I think a lot of people think dry, but they really don't know what dry means in terms of sake. So Junmai, the category Junmai just refers to the fact that there's 4 ingredients. There's rice, water, yeast, and a thing called koji.
Right.
Think of koji like malt in beer brewing. It transforms the starch of the rice into glucose.
Okay.
And there's no minimum polish ratio for Junmai. That's what Junmai is. Then you have Junmai Ginjo, and you have Junmai Daiginjo.
Okay.
Junmai still means the same thing. There's just 4 ingredients.
So the Ginjo and the Daigenjo.
Junmai Ginjo just means the polish ratio for the rice is between, is less, is more polished off. So there's more of the rice removed. And then Junmai Daiginjo means at least more than 50% of the grain or more has been removed. So it's a really small grain that they use. And that means Junmai Daiginjo. So the flavor profiles vary in terms of Junmai being bigger, earthier, kind of maybe sometimes often drier. Junmai Ginjo is going to have a little bit more floral, fruity kind of aromatics, but yet very sturdy. And then Junmai Daiginjo are going to be the most elegant, most, sort of very smooth. Not that the other ones aren't smooth, but it's just really just delicate, exquisite kind of flavors on the Junmai Daiginjo. But the Junmai part is still the same throughout. It just means there's 4 ingredients. Then I might just jump in this real quick. The next sake I was going to do is Morai Tokubetsu Honjozo. So this sake has the 4 ingredients, and then we have a little bit of brewer's alcohol added to the sake. What that is for flavor and aroma. It doesn't add to the alcohol level. It's still the same alcohol level that the other sakes are. It's just brewed a different way. So the way I explain it to people is if you have like dark beer, you have porter beer and stout beer. I always say, well, which one's better? Well, you can't answer that question because it's all personal preference.
Yeah.
People tend to think if you add alcohol to this that it's a lesser quality, but that's completely a misconception. It is equal in quality to Junmai type sakes. It's just brewed a different manner. And there's a lot of alcohol added sake in Japan. But again, it's a very special way of doing it. It's a very small amount of alcohol they add. It's usually from rice or from sugarcane. And again, it's for flavor and aroma. So therefore, if it's a honjozo, you can't use the word Junmai because there's 5 ingredients. So then you go to the next section, you have ginjo, and it's just called ginjo. It's not called Junmai ginjo, it's just called ginjo. That means there's probably just a little bit of brewer's alcohol added to it. And then you have the same with dai ginjo or Junmai dai ginjo. They're exact same quality level, just that one has 5 ingredients and one has 4 ingredients.
I love that you say it's simple.